Deus, salutaris nostre, Dominex Deus, Irinex Deus, Irinex Deus, Deus noster, Dominex Noster, Angeli, Arcangeli, Ave Patri, Laudamon Deum, Domino Majestatis,
How's everybody doing? I've been having a fantastic day. It is the Wednesday after the first Sunday in Lent. Can you
It is
believe?
an Ember Wednesday, remember? It's an
Oh,
Ember Wednesday today.
I got the liturgical day wrong. It is Ember Wednesday. Yes, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, Wednesday after the first Sunday of Lent is fine. It's the same thing.
Yeah, but saying Ember Wednesday sounds cooler though.
It does sound cool. It's the Wednesday per what is it? Quattro Temporum in Lent. In Quadragesima. Yeah,
So
there we go.
that means all of you out there should be praying for all of the seminarians, all of those being ordained, okay? That's what you got to do on Ember Wednesdays. But anyways, what we wanted to do today is there's actually a very interesting work from St. Augustine. It's in the form of a long letter, and it's called On Continence. So this work on continence is not just about sexual purity, as one would imagine from the title. That's a part of it, of course. But rather, it's about the entire warfare that we have against concupiscence. So a lot of you may be unfamiliar with the term concupiscence, but basically, for St. Augustine, this idea of concupiscence is that you have the passions, you have the sense appetites. And these passions, these sense appetites, they, due to the effects of the fall, war against the reason. And those who are not justified, those who are fallen in Adam, and if not yet or are not currently in a state of grace, these individuals, their concupiscence overtakes their reason and orders it away from God by tempting the will to turn away from God and making an act of mortal sin. But for those who are just, rather than having the opposite case, which would be we're completely free from concupiscence, God permits this battle to occur within us during the time of this life. And when it comes to this battle, we have, on the one hand, as St. Paul says, we have the flesh lusting against the spirit. So the flesh is attempting to drag the spirit, and by the spirit, we're talking about intellect and will. We're talking about our higher faculties. The lower faculties are attempting to drag these down to bestial desires and to order us away from our last end, which is God. And on the other hand, the flesh, the spirit lusteth against the flesh. And what this is that the spirit refuses to consent to the desires that the flesh attempts to drag us down to. And basically, when it comes to this is the entire essence of Christian warfare, wherein the spirit lusteth against the flesh, and the flesh lusteth against the spirit. And if we consent to those motions of concupiscence, which are attempting to draw us to unlawful things, if we consent to these, this is something which is an act of sin. But if we withhold our consent, this is proper Christian warfare. This is not an act of sin. But we always look forward to the future when, in the beatific vision, but when we receive our bodies back from the resurrection of the dead, our bodies will not then be suffering under the disorders of concupiscence that we suffer through this entire life. So that's when we will finally reach this complete perfection of virtue in the next life, in both the soul and in the body. Whereas for now, we only have the degree of perfection insofar as we are ordered towards God, and there still is this order of the soul to God, and then the flesh, even while it's rebelling against the spirit, the spirit still lusteth against the flesh and refuses consent to all of those motions of concupiscence that it brings it towards. That may sound very complicated, but we need to know these sort of doctrinal prerequisites before we actually get into the text, or we're not going to be able to draw forth a lot of the conclusions. If any of that was confusing to you as we go through, I'm sure this doctrine will be illustrated in such a way as you will be able to understand. So, Hassan, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Yeah, I love the typing in the Discord ASMR in the background. It's amazing.
What do you mean the Discord? I'm not in your crappy Discord server.
No, no, no. The Discord notifications going off, I guess.
Oh, sorry, I thought I turned that off. I've got my Bluetooth
Yeah,
headphones
Hassan
in, so
Hassan has Discord open so often that he can't even
it's
hear the
because I've
noise
got
anymore.
sound cancelling headphones in.
Yeah,
Come
this is
on.
nobody
Yeah,
is
it's
on a
in
call with
streamer mode.
sound canceling headphones. That's definitely fake.
I
Okay,
am. I'm
well,
on my phone.
with this is the work on continence. And by the way, as a note, this may look a little bit different than the version you're going to get on New Advent. There's a reason for that. When it comes to the New Advent versions of the Fathers, there's some difficulties. Oftentimes, the numbering is weird. Oftentimes, they don't provide biblical citations. The formatting is weird. It's just hard to read. It's not easy on the eyes. They take off the headings from the original editions. But this isn't, in some cases, yes, it is their formatting issues. In other cases, it's just that's what Shaft did when Shaft was the general editor of the Shaft set, the Ante-Nicene and Post-Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers. So I changed a lot of this substantially. The text is basically the same, but I did add some section titles, I have paragraph breaks, stuff like that for readability purposes. All of the in-text citations back. So if you want to get a copy of this, you can just go to my website, and it should be the most recent article, and I also linked the article below for those who are watching it later. Okay, so let's begin. So this is the introduction to the work. It is difficult to treat of the virtue of the soul, which is called continence, in a manner fully suitable and worthy. But he whose great gift this virtue is, will help our littleness under the burden of so great a weight. For he who bestows it upon his faithful ones, when they are continent, himself gives discourse of it to his ministers when they speak. Lastly, of so great a matter, purposing to speak, what himself shall grant. In the first place, we say and prove that continence is a gift of God. So, in this initial section, there's actually an important principle that he brings forward. And the spiritual writers in general are always going to highlight this fact. And this fact is when it comes to the virtues, when it comes to those gifts wherein we overcome vices, wherein we overcome concupiscence, this is going to be something which is a gift of God. So all of these are graces, and these are graces which are received principally from prayer. So we pray and we ask for the graces to be able to overcome concupiscence. And this is what makes the Christian moral life, the life which is infused by grace, the life which is ordered to beatitude. This is what makes it different than any of the pagan and naturalistic ways of going about their ethical doctrine. In their ethical doctrine, they think that by mere habituation, by mere acquiring of virtues by repeated acts, that is how we come to true virtue. But in accordance with the teaching of St. Augustine and the teaching of the Catholic Church, these virtues which come to us don't come to us merely by habituation. Rather, these are gifts of God which are given to us. So he's going to prove this right in the beginning. He's going to go on and say, and he's going to prove it for the various different classes of men. We have it written in the book of wisdom that no one can be continent unless God grant it. But the Lord, concerning the greater and more glorious continence itself, whereby this is continence from the marriage bond. So this is going to be consecrated virginity. Says, not all can receive this saying, but they to whom it is given. And since marriage chastity also itself cannot be guarded, unless there be continence from unlawful intercourse, the apostle declares both to be the gift of God, when he spoke of both lives, that is, both that of marriage and that without marriage, saying, I would that of all men were so as myself, but each has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that manner. So in this spot, obviously, he just proves this from Scripture, that this is the case. Continence is needed to be asked for from God. Prayer is going to be very important, obviously, to St. Augustine's view of how we engage in spiritual warfare. But he's going to say that this is obviously the case from Scripture for both the married and also those who are in a state of celibacy. Do you have anything to say to this first section, Hassan?
No, this is pretty straightforward. We've talked about this many times, I think.
Yes. Okay, good. Okay, now the next section, the inner mouth of the heart. And after this section, he has a very interesting methodology that he's going to follow after we get out of this first section. He's going to begin going on to show that the external actions, those external sinful actions that we may suffer from, that these are things which, according to the teaching of sacred Scripture, actually begin with interior consent. And this is going to be very important for when he draws out his practical ramifications for how we overcome sin. He goes on and says, and lest it should seem that necessary continence was to be hoped for from the Lord only in respect of the lust of the lower parts of the flesh, it is also sung in the psalm, set, O Lord, a watch to my mouth and a door of continence around my lips. But in this witness of the divine speech, if we understand mouth as we ought to understand it, we perceive how great a gift of God continence there said is. Forsooth, it is little to contain the mouth of the body, lest anything burst forth thence, which is not for the better, through the sound of the voice. For there is within the mouth of the heart, where he who spoke these words and wrote them for us to speak, desired of the Lord that the watch and door of continence should be set for him. For many things we say, not with the mouth of the body, and cry aloud with the heart, but there goes forth from the mouth of the body no word of anything, whereof there is silence in the heart. Therefore, what flows not forth thence sounds not abroad. What flows forth thence, if it be evil, although it move not the tongue, defiles the soul. So basically the point he's making here is that even if you have this interior inclination, let's say you have a desire, let's say I have a desire to yell at Hassan and to call him an idiot. Let's say, this desire just arises in my soul, just very suddenly, I'm just thinking of Hassan and that's what arises. Even if I don't go out and tell Hassan about this, even if this is not the case, if I consent to this interior inclination, that is, I say, ooh, I really want to say that, but I just happen to not be given the opportunity, I'm still committing a certain sin, right? I'm still sinning against Hassan, even if this does not proceed by word or by action. But on the other hand, if you have some sort of interior inclination, and this interior inclination is not consented to, so you have a motion of lust, and you don't consent to this motion of lust, in this case, according to what St. Augustine is going to say throughout this work, that is not a sin. So the whole role of the spiritual life is to consider and understand those motions you have in your own soul and be able to fortify yourself and to ask God to place a guard over the mouth of your heart so that you do not consent to those things. Do you have anything
You think this is connected to?
Yeah.
You think this is connected to our reading from Ash Wednesday about in the Sermon on the Mount when Christ says, "Go into your inner room and close the door," because St. Thomas connects it to this concept of the mouth of the interior heart as one of the spiritual readings. Do you think,
I definitely.
This is the same thing.
I think it is because this is actually, there's something similar because we can think about this on the flip side as well. Just as we can think about the mouth of the body and then the mouth of the heart as to immoral acts, we can also think about this on its flip side to the way in which the mouth of the body, the mouth of the heart concerns acts of spirituality, because we have that initial motion, and that initial motion is a certain actual grace, and then this initial motion is either rejected, and then just like if you reject concupiscence, you do not sin. So if you reject this motion of some sort of actual grace, then you do sin. And you can consent to this motion in two ways. You can either consent to this motion insofar as you make interior acts of mental prayer, or you can consent to this motion as well as to exterior acts, which is going to be vocal prayer. And similarly, we could also consider the fact that if you simply confess God with your lips, but not with your heart, then in this case, it's going to be some sort of empty prayer. So yeah, I think we could just like flip this on its head in an interesting way. Cool. Anyways, therefore continence must be set there, where the continence even of them who are silent speaks. For it is brought to pass by means of the door of continence, that there go not forth thence that which, even when the lips of the flesh are closed, pollutes the life of him that has the thought. So you have to remember that when it comes to virtues, there's something similar actually that frequently gets spoken of the tradition in terms of moral virginity. That's it's like a weird kind of a weird term, I guess, in English to speak in this way. But there is a certain way in which the virtue of purity is destroyed, not simply by the act of intercourse, but also by many other sexually immoral acts. And this would include the virtue being sullied by internal acts. So if you want to talk about the fullness of purity, just like the fullness of continence, is not only going to consist in external acts, it's also going to consist in internal acts, wherein while we still have internal motions of concupiscence, as everyone does until we have the resurrection of the body, while we still have these internal motions of concupiscence, we ask God to set a door over the mouth of our heart insofar as we reject these. And that is the full and genuine meaning of purity. Yeah, somebody, quickly, I wanted to answer this. Is it better to have Eucharist in a state of sin rather than skipping it if you absolutely cannot make it to confession? Or should you skip it until you've gone to confession?
Whoa. Well, what the heck?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I answered this really quick so he sees it. But yeah, don't receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin. You have to go to confession.
Ever. Never, ever do that. Never, ever, ever do that. There are exceptions to not to receiving in a state of sin, but there are exceptions to receiving without confession, and this is there are special canonical exceptions where you haven't gone to confession, but you have a moral certainty that you're in a state of grace from perfect contrition, and in some very special circumstances you can receive the Eucharist. But the ordinary circumstances that you absolutely do not do that. So if you go to Mass and there's just not enough time to get a confession in, just abstain. You're not going to explode. You're not going to burst into flames because you went to Mass without receiving the Eucharist. Just sit down, please. That you don't have to get up. Just sit down and pray.
Yeah, it's I mean, and by those exceptions, Hassan mentioned, like those exceptions are basically like you're a missionary priest and there is no other priest for 10,000 miles and you're not going to see him for 5 years, and you have to celebrate Mass for people. Like that's like the type of situation. It's not like, oh, I'm late to Mass and I wasn't able to get to confession.
Yeah, a priest can't celebrate Mass without receiving the Eucharist, so he would be in a tough spot, basically.
Mm-hmm. Is it a real Hassan stream if there's no Discord notification in the background? Okay. Anyways, I thought that was going to be a real question. I started reading it, then I realized it wasn't. Okay. So now continence of the heart. Is there anything else that you wanted to say to that, or should we continue?
No, I'm looking forward to the rest of this.
Lastly, to show more plainly the inner mouth, which by these words he meant, after having said, "Set a watch, O Lord, to my mouth, and a door of continence around my lips," he added straightway, Cause not my heart to fall aside into evil words. The falling aside of the heart, uh, this is like a really strange translation. Sorry. I don't know why these Shaft guys translated things like this. The falling aside of the heart, what is it but the consent? Okay, this is going to be very important here, okay? I want you guys to keep this in mind because oftentimes you will get misunderstandings of St. Augustine's teaching when it comes to concupiscence, where some people will say that for St. Augustine, regardless of consent, that concupiscence is sinful. But for St. Augustine, he teaches consistently, and we'll see this throughout this work, that unless you consent to those motions of concupiscence, unless you consent to those motions of the passions that I mentioned earlier, then this is not going to be something which is sinful. So, for example, if you have a sudden motion of lust, let's say, if you resist this firmly, obviously asking the help of God to set that door of continence. Sorry, that door. I almost said door of concupiscence. Set that door of continence around my lips to be able to pray that in order to resist this motion. Then you're obviously not sinning in this case. But if you consent to it and you receive the thought and consider the thought, etc., this is going to be something which is sinful. For he has not yet spoken. Whosoever in his heart has with no falling aside of the heart consented unto suggestions that meet him of each several things that is seen. Okay, very important here. But if he has consented, he has already spoken his heart, although he has not uttered sound by the mouth, although he has not done with hand or any part whatever of the body. Yet has he done what in his thought he has already determined that he is to do, guilty by the divine laws, although hidden to human senses. The word having been spoken in the heart, no deed having been committed through the body. But in no case would he have moved the limb without, in a deed, the beginning of which deed had not gone before within in word. For it is no lie what is written, that the beginning of every work is a word. Forsooth, men do many things with mouth closed, tongue quiet, voice bridled, but yet they do nothing by work of the body, which they had not before spoken in the heart. And again, this is the principle that's going to lead to such ideas. Actually, I mentioned in my fasting video of why we mortify the flesh. We have these motions of concupiscence that go forth in the heart, that speak forth in the heart, and the consent to these motions of concupiscence, to the desires of the flesh, these are going to be the things that are going to be antecedent to, they're going to precede those outward sinful actions that you're going to engage in. So the reason we have the mortification of the flesh is we're not only denying those desires, those concupiscences, those motions, which are inordinate and by divine law need to be rejected, or else if you permit them to continue, then you're going to be sinning, or you're not vigilant as you ought, you're going to be sinning. Rather, we go even further. We kind of push in past the enemy line, and we're also going to even resist those motions which are lawful. The desire to eat and to take enjoyment in your food is not something of an unlawful motion. It's not something of an unlawful desire. And to consent to those desires are not unlawful. But you can go even further than that consent to those inordinate desires and even refuse consent to those ordered and lawful desires. And this is going to put you in greater control over those motions, over your desires and over your passions. So that's the whole point of fasting, is this principle right here, is we want to kind of get to the root of things and we want to uproot them. Continuing, and through this, since there are many sins in inward sayings, which are not in outward deeds, whereas there are none in outward deeds which do not go before in inward sayings, there will be purity of innocence from both, if the door of continence be set around the inward lips. You have anything to say, Hassan, about this, or should we continue?
No.
Okay, the gospel teaching on inner continence. For which cause our Lord himself, also with his own mouth, says, "Cleanse what are within, and what are without will be clean." And also in another place, when he was refuting the foolish speeches of the Jews, in that they spoke evil against his disciples, eating with unwashed hands, "Not what enters into the mouth," said he, "defiles the man, but what comes forth out of the mouth, that defiles the man." Which sentence, if the whole of it be taken of the mouth of the body, is absurd. For neither does vomit defile him, whom food defiles not. Forsooth, food enters into the mouth, vomit proceeds forth out of the mouth. But without doubt, the former words relate to the mouth of the flesh, where he says, "Not what enters into the mouth defiles the man," but the latter words to the mouth of the heart, where he says, "But what proceeds forth out of the mouth, this defiles the man." Lastly, when the apostle Peter sought of him an explanation of this as of a parable, he answered, "Are ye also yet without understanding? Understand ye not that whatsoever enters into the mouth goes into the belly, and is cast out into the draught? Here surely we perceive the mouth of the flesh, into which the food enters." But in what he next adds, in order that we might recognize the mouth of the heart, the slowness of our heart would not follow, did not the truth deign to walk even with the slow. For he says, "But what things go forth from the mouth go out of the heart," as though he should say, when you hear it said from the mouth, understand from the heart. I say both, but I set forth one by the other. The inner man has an inner mouth, and this the inner ear discerns. What things go forth from this mouth go out of the heart, and they defile the man. Then, having left the term mouth, which may be understood also of the body, he shows more openly what he is saying. For from the heart go out, says he, evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are what defile the man. There's surely no one of these evils which can be committed also by the members of the body, but that the evil thoughts go before and defile the man, although something hinders the sinful and wicked deeds of the body from following. So, again, he's just continually proving what he had already said from the Gospels. For if, because power is not given, the hand is free from the murder of a man, is the heart of the murderer, forsooth, therefore clean from sin? Or if she be chaste, whom one unchaste wishes to commit adultery with, has he on that account failed to commit adultery with her in his heart? Or if the harlot be not found in the brothel, does he who seeks her on that account fail to commit fornication in his heart? Or if time and place be wanting to one who wishes to hurt his neighbor by a lie, has he on that account failed already to speak false witness with his inner mouth? Or if anyone fearing men dare not utter aloud blasphemy with tongue of flesh, is he on this account guiltless of this crime, who says in his heart there is no God? Thus all other evil deeds of men, which no motion of the body performs, of which no sense of the body is conscious, have their own secret criminals, who are also polluted by consent alone in thought, that is, by evil words of the inner mouth. So notice, he's defining it right here. So the consent alone in thought is equal to the evil words of the inner mouth. So if you're confused what he means, what the heck does he mean by the evil words of the inner mouth? He basically just means there's these motions of concupiscence that come up, and you consent to these motions of concupiscence. Into which he, the psalmist, fearing lest his heart should fall aside, asks of the Lord that the door of continence be set around the lips of this mouth, to contain the heart, that it fall not aside into evil words, but contain it, by not suffering thought to proceed to consent. For thus, according to the precept of the apostle, sin reigns not in our mortal body, nor do we yield our members as weapons of unrighteousness unto sin. Do you have anything to say about that chapter, Hassan?
No. Do you?
Okay, let's continue.
Okay. Do you?
Yeah,
Do you think there's anything particularly noteworthy?
No, it's basically just repeating it, but proving it from the Gospels. I can hear your
Yeah.
beautiful little keyboard clicks. I love to hear it.
Nice.
And on this account, that which the parts that beget, being bridled by modesty, and this is actually pudicity right here, Hassan. The modesty part of it, I forgot to put the little pudicity note in it. Which pudicity is just a certain. You think actually, as a note, do you think pudicity has the same sense as the scholastics in the fathers? Do you know about this at all?
I think in the fathers it was more etymological from like the word pudor, which is closer to it's just closer to like the concept of like a sort of like hygienic purity. It's because
Oh,
yeah, because the connection between shame and carnal sin was such that it was seen to be like, when we say something is disgusting, right? There's a certain like disgustingness to carnal sins. So therefore, pudicity is basically like cleanliness against that, right? So
yeah.
yeah, so but in later authors, pudicity specifically designates like the virtue whereby we avoid causing lust in others and ourselves, but with more of a connotation of preventing the arising of lust in others. Right.
Yeah, there's something interesting on this in Secunda Secundae, when Saint Thomas talks about pudicity.
Mhm.
Basically, he says that when it comes to pudicity, pudicity regards venereal manners properly, and especially the signs thereof, such as impure looks, kisses, and touches. And since the
Mhm.
latter are more wont to be observed, pudicity regards rather these external signs, while chastity regards rather sexual union. Um, so yeah, with Saint Thomas, when he's reading pudicity, um, he says that sometimes, he actually says in the reply to the first objection, Augustine is here speaking of pudicity as designating chastity. So sometimes it is said of purely in terms of chastity, which is a little bit broader. But at other times, pudicity is just in reference to the external, um, the external signs, like having basically public displays of affection in public. Well, obviously they're going to be in public. In certain displays of affection in public, that are those secondary acts um, secondary venereal acts. So, like a couple who is kissing in public would be lacking in pudicity, or touching, stuff like that would be lacking in pudicity. Which, weirdly enough, is pudicity is not a virtue that is often spoken about widely by Westerners, who often think that this isn't a virtue at all, but is somehow puritanical in nature. But anyways, and on this account, that which the parts that beget, so obviously this is talking about the genitals, being bridled by pudicity, is most chiefly and properly to be called continence, is violated by no transgression. If the higher continence, so obviously the higher continence is going to be that internal, if the higher continence, concerning which we have been sometimes speaking, be preserved in the heart. For this reason, the Lord, after he had said, "For from the heart go forth evil thoughts," then went on to add what it is that belongs to evil thoughts: murders, adulteries, etc. He spoke not of all, but, having named certain by way of instance, he taught that we are to understand others also, of which there is no one that can take place unless an evil thought have gone before, whereby that is prepared within, which is done without, and going forth out of the mouth of the heart already defiles the man, although, through no power being granted, it be not done without by means of the members of the body. When therefore a door of continence has been set in the mouth of the heart, whence go out all that defile the man. If nothing such be permitted to go out thence, there follows a pudicity, wherein now the conscience may rejoice, although there be not as yet that perfection wherein continence shall not strive with vice. So this is the next idea that we're going to need to go into right here. So we have right here, there's that purity, that pudicity, wherein the conscience may rejoice. So we have a clean conscience when we have that door of continence over the mouth of the heart. So we have these motions of concupiscence, and we do not in any way consent to them. In this way, we actually have a clear conscience. My conscience does not excuse me of sin, because anytime I have, these motions, I reject these motions. These motions of concupiscence are rejected to me. Therefore, I can live with a clean conscience in terms of God, because my will is inclined towards Him and not inclined towards earthly things. So, but there is this degree in which we say, while my conscience is clean, I understand from the very fact that I have to struggle with concupiscence, I understand that I don't have that perfection which I am going to reach after I die, right? So that's what's going to be, this is going to be a very important, and you may be confused why I'm pointing out some of these things, but these are very important hermeneutical principles for not only understanding this work, but also all of the anti-Pelagian works of St. Augustine, which I've read. So this is going to be very, very important. And also, generally speaking, a lot of this stuff, as we'll see from his exegesis of St. Paul, is going to help you understand St. Paul and how St. Paul teaches the Catholic view of justification. But anyways, continuing. But now, so long as the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, it is enough for us not to consent unto the evils which we feel in us. But when that consent takes place, then there goes out of the mouth of the heart what defiles the man. But when through continence consent is withheld, the evil of the lust, concupiscence of the flesh, against with the concupiscence of the spirit fights, is not suffered to harm. So when consent is withheld, the spirit is not harmed. Okay? Is there anything to add here, Hassan?
No.
Okay. On the inner struggle. But it is one thing to fight well, which now is, when the strife of death is resisted, another thing not to have an adversary, which will be when death, the last enemy, shall be destroyed. So now we fight, then the adversary is dead. So now we fight against concupiscence, then we won't even have it. For continence also itself, when it curbs and restrains lust, at once both seeks the good unto the immortality of which we aim, and rejects the evil with which in this mortality we condemn. So this is very important. There's actually, when it comes to the spiritual struggle, there's a certain contemplation that we can have of the end of man. Because the end of man is that perfection of the angels, where we will be as if we did not even have this concupiscence at all, because any sort of sense desire is going to be completely under the control of the higher faculties of our soul. So when we engage in this warfare and we engage in this combat, we are pointing to and imitating the future blessed life, and rejects the evil with which in this mortality we contend. Of the one it is forsooth the lover and beholder, but of the other both the enemy and the witness, both seeking what becomes, so that's beatitude, and fleeing what misbecomes, this concupiscence. Assuredly, continence would not labor in curbing lusts if we had no wishes contrary to what is becoming, if there were no opposition on the part of evil lust unto our good will. So notice our will is good, so our higher faculties are good, rather it's our lower faculties that have this evil lust. The apostle cries aloud, I know, says he, that there dwells not in me, that is, in my flesh, good. For to will lies near to me, but to accomplish good I find not. For now good can be done, so far as that there be no consent given unto evil lust, but good will be accomplished when evil lust itself shall come to an end. And also the same teacher of the Gentiles cries aloud, I take pleasure together with the law of God after the inner man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of the mind. you have anything to add there, Hassam?
No, but this reminded me of something else I'll talk about later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now continuing on law and grace, and this is really good. The interpretation of the law and grace. Freaking love this stuff. This conflict none experience in themselves, save such as war on the side of the virtues and wore down the vices. Yeah, this is actually really good. This conflict none experience in themselves, save such as war on the side of the virtues and wore down the vices. So this conflict is actually something that's completely a unique experience of us who are who have received the grace of the new covenant. Nor does anything storm the evil of lust, save the good of continence. But there are, and by the way, if I haven't made this clear yet, lust is the best translation right here. That's why I have concupiscence, in the little brackets, parentheses, because by continence and by lust, they don't simply mean like sexual purity and sexual impurity. They're talking more broadly. This fits in with any virtue and any vice, right? Nor does anything storm the evil of lust, save the good of continence. But there are who, being utterly ignorant of the law of God, account not evil lusts among their enemies, and through wretched blindness, being slaves to them, over and above think themselves also blessed by satisfying them rather than taming them. But, and then this is the first group of people right here. So you have certain people who are so ignorant of the law of God, they're so ignorant of the precept of God to tame their lusts that they actually just simply satisfy and indulge them in their wretched blindness. Because I mean, at this point, they're just acting like irrational beasts rather than actual men. And then there's going to be another group of people. But whoever through the law have come to know them, for through the law is the knowledge of sin, and lust, says he, I knew not, unless the law should say, you shall not lust after, and yet are overcome by their assault, because they live under the law, whereby what is good is commanded, but not also given. They live not under grace, which gives through the Holy Spirit what is commanded through the law. Unto these the law therefore entered, and in them the offense might abound. So why are we not right here saved through the law, but rather we fulfill the law through grace? Well, the reason is, he explains it right here, and he explains it in a lot of different places. You can read on nature and grace. You can read, I think it's on the, trying to think of the name of the other work where he discusses this. On man's perfection, righteousness, on the letter and the spirit as well. Those three books, he talks about this a lot. But basically what he's saying here is that what's the distinction between the law, which we're not justified under, and the law only kills? Why does the law kill? The reason the law kills is the law gives you a precept. So the law says, thou shalt not covet. And St. Augustine specifically, by the way, against those who will say otherwise, St. Augustine is specifically interpreting this thou shalt not covet as thou shalt not speak those words with the mouth of the heart, right? So the law says, do not covet, do not have these inward motions of lust. But the law, unlike the gospel, does not give the grace to carry out the commandments. So the law just tells you to do something, but the law doesn't actually give you that help to carry out those obligations. This is differently when it comes to the gospel. The gospel not only commands certain things, the gospel also gives those graces to carry them out. And this is why, through charity, which is poured out into our hearts, we're able to fulfill the law. Right? We're able to fulfill the law because we have been, we're not laboring under our own works. We're not laboring under our own righteousness, but rather we're laboring under the righteousness of God. Not that whereby he is righteous, but that whereby he gives us righteousness. The prohibition increased the lust, and made it unconquered, that there might be transgression also, which without the law was not, although there was sin. For where there is not law, neither is there transgression. Thus the law, grace not helping, forbidding sin, became over and above the strength of sin. Whence the apostle says the law is the strength of sin. Well, why is this the case? It's relatively easy to explain. The reason is if you give somebody a command and you don't give them those helps to fulfill those commands, rather what it's going to do is it's just going to clarify what is already present in conscience and make them more liable, which is why the law is called the strength of sin, which is why the law is said to condemn, the law is said to be killing, etc., etc. Because it's binding your conscience even further, but it's not giving those aids and those helps in order to fulfill the obligations of conscience. Nor is it to be wondered at that man's weakness, even from the good law, added strength to evil, while it trusts to fulfill the law itself of its own strength. Forsooth, being ignorant of the righteousness of God, which he gives unto the weak, and wishing to establish his own, of which the weak is void, he was not made subject to the righteousness of God, reprobate and proud. But if the law, notice this is the good part of the law, what the law is supposed to do, right? Which is why there can't be all these objections of, oh, but isn't this unfair, etc., etc. But if the law, as a pedagogue, as a schoolmaster, leads unto grace one made an offender, and though for this purpose more grievously wounded, that he may desire a physician against the baneful sweetness whereby lust prevailed, the Lord gives a sweetness that works good, that by it continence may the more delight, and our land gives her fruit, whereby the soldier is fed, who by the help of the Lord wars down sin. So right here what we get is the law is supposed to afflict and humble people. We see the law is supposed to afflict us and wound us insofar as we're not able to fulfill the law by our own powers. What does this do? This sends us right to God. This sends us to God in order to ask for his grace to be able to fulfill what he commands, right? We're able to ask for forgiveness for all of those transgressions of the law. So this is the purpose of the law. The law is meant to send us to God to ask for those aids, ask for those helps in order to carry out what is commanded. That's the purpose in the mind of St. Augustine right here. And of course, this is going to connect to your fight against sin. Because when it comes to your fight against sin, you have this understanding of certain obligations, right? Because you can treat the precepts of the gospel just as badly as the Jews treated the precepts of the law. If you're going to view the moral life as, oh, I'm just supposed to, not fornicate, or oh, I'm just supposed to not do this, or oh, I'm supposed to not do this. But we don't understand our own mortal weakness. We don't understand our own proclivity of sin. And this through experience, through the understanding of our own passions, to where we know that the flesh lusteth against the spirit. We're not going to ask for the graces of God in order to carry out which is commanded, so that the spirit may lust against the flesh and reject all of those motions of concupiscence, right? So we can treat the gospel just as the Jews treated the law, and it's very easy to do this. And this is all solved through being constant in prayer in order to carry out our duties, and not simply relying on one's own power, as weak as it is. Do you have anything to say, Hassan?
Yeah, so this brings me back to what I was going to say earlier. The idea of the law as a pedagogue, we still have this concept for us today in the church. Before it was the pedagogy of the law of Scripture, and now it's the pedagogy of the church, right? So recently, one of my guys was asking in Papacy Hub about Colossians 2 verse 9, and his question was, a confusion about what it meant Christologically, because he was like, it says the plenitude of divinity dwells in him corporeally. How is that not locating God, right? So
Yeah.
this was explained to him, but the question is also like, you can understand what the text is saying there from context. Like the purpose of Colossians is to teach people what to do in the case of heresy, right?
Yeah.
The defense of the church from the internal damage of St. Thomas says heresy connected with schism and moral destruction, right? In the prologue to Colossians, he mentions that schism and moral destruction, they're like kind of downstream from heresy, right? So what's interesting is that in Colossians 2 verse 9, when it says, "For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead corporeally," the point of this is to say that you ought to withdraw from arguing from like mere philosophy and the tradition of men, i.e., the authority of human beings, right? You ought to withdraw from those things whenever they don't accord with what is known by faith and the things that are of faith, right? So it's very interesting because the argument which is being made here is connected to what's said in what we got from Romans 7, where St. Paul says, "I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh." Compare the correspondence there, right? For in him the plenitude of the divinity dwells corporeally, versus for I know nothing good dwells in me, that is in my body, right? So the point here is that like the assurance of true knowledge about matters of faith and matters of morals is in Christ, who has this freedom, who has this freedom, not merely a freedom from the concupiscence that we deal with, which affects our ability to know the truth or to feel rightly, right? To feel rightly or to know rightly, but also he has something even more than merely being immune from this. He has like the very divinity, the measure of all truths, the measure of all goods in him, united to not only his soul but also to his body. So basically, the interesting point for me is that, which is connected to the point St. Augustine just made now that we read, is that if the law is a schoolmaster and it leads unto grace one made an offender, as though for this purpose more grievously wounded, that he may desire a physician, how much more important is it that in the Catholic Church and through the living tradition of the Catholic Church, we be made very clearly aware, keenly aware of what it is that revelation teaches us is what makes us an offender, so that we can be led to grace by grief and by desire. If we didn't have the tradition of the church to clearly explain these things to us, how would we know many of the things that are more derivative precepts of the moral law, or are secondary precepts, or are secondary precepts of the law, and are much more downstream of the proximate principles of moral science? We can't easily know those things by reason alone, even without considering original sin. So we would have much less ability to actually pursue moral goodness and the harmony of the powers of the soul. We would also we would also find it much more difficult to actually pursue continence. Now, this is an important point against people who would ask, isn't it better to be invincibly ignorant of the fact that fornication is immoral than to know that fornication is immoral and feel that it is immoral and then do it? Right? The answer is in a sense yes, because you're not committing like an act which is against the rule of reason, in terms of your own subjective reason. However, whenever you do anything which is materially immoral, even if it's not a formal sin, you still damage the powers of your soul. And this was a point that came up recently in the video, the comment section of the video you did on Chris West, right?
Mhm.
There are a couple of people who were saying, well, even if you were right, these people wouldn't be committing sins. So the title of the video is wrong because it's claiming that Chris West is leading people into mortal sin. And it occurred to me that that this was absurd immediately, right? But I realized then that the people who are commenting this don't actually understand that material sins lead to mortal sins, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're constantly doing things that are materially wrong and you don't know that they're wrong, you're still like offsetting your relationship with your passions, and that will eventually drive you to commit mortal sins. If you're someone who thinks lying isn't wrong, and you tell little lies frequently, thinking it's okay, you will eventually just tell mortal lies. You will just tell grievous lies. If you think it's okay to cuddle with your girlfriend, right? As you're doing this, eventually you will make at least acts of the heart which are sinful, which are mortally sinful, and you won't have this pedagogical effect, of like grieving for these things that you don't realize, and so you won't be kept away from those other more obvious things by that grief and by that desire St. Augustine's talking about.
So true. And I wanted to clarify this. Clearly, not all the law binds conscience, as it does not belong to the natural law to be circumcised or to obey Jewish dietary practices. Well, it's pretty easy when you realize that obeying God is a part of the natural law. So, being circumcised or obeying dietary practices in themselves are obviously not part of the natural law, but the obedience which we render unto God when He commands such things are binding on conscience. Okay. So, do you want to continue? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one point here. So, material idolatry happens in two ways, right? For example, one would be when you submit yourself to some supposedly divinely instituted authority that is in fact not divinely instituted, especially when it's an institution which informs you about supposed revelation that is not revelation. But then on the other hand, material idolatry would be worship based on any falsehood. So, for example, there are sometimes interpretations in the fathers of the same places in scripture that are like wildly different in their meaning. For example, one father thinks that Jephthah sinned when he sacrificed his daughter, and another one thinks it was an act which is honorable and admirable because it was inspired by the Holy Spirit. So when let's say that the ones who believe that he did something admirable are incorrect, right? Let's say that they're wrong, and then they make a prayer to God on the basis of what Jephthah did, because of Hebrews 11 mentioning Jephthah, right? If on the chance that they are wrong, that they make this prayer, they do a materially idolatrous act, but that's only materially idolatrous for an extrinsic reason, which is like a false judgment of truth. It's not because the act which they are making is like intrinsically disordered. They're not like telling lies to God intentionally, right? So you see that this is going to be the same with like circumcision and following dietary laws, that these are only wrong for extrinsic reasons. Yeah. So I don't think that this is a good comparison. Does that track, or am I losing you?
That tracks. Okay. Hassan, would that make Protestants and or Muslims at least materially idolaters?
Yeah, of course. But I mean,
Well,
there would be
idolatry in the broad or the narrow sense.
Yeah, but in the sense in which we spoke, yeah. But like but even as I spoke there, I was distinguishing between different kinds of material idolatry because, like, for example, if I make a prayer to God based upon an incorrect interpretation of a Bible verse that I read that I thought was meant in the plain sense, whereas actually the human author meant it as a metaphor, like I'm misattributing something to God, right? So there is a kind of material idolatry there, but it's not the same kind of material idolatry than if I like then like when my family like prays Islamic prayers, believing that like they're divinely obligated to do so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Hassan is a material idolater, is what I'm hearing from this.
Yeah, real. But I mean, then there would also be the question of like when any theologian with a false opinion about the one God prays, does he commit material idolatry?
Yeah.
Yeah, in a certain sense, but only in like a very broad sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cajetan, he talks about this in interpreting St. Thomas, and he basically says that, like, because do you remember the weird text from St. Thomas where St. Thomas says, like, one who has unbelief, like, cannot believe in God since God is a simple form, etc. Do you remember that text?
Are you talking about the one in John 4 or the one in the Summa?
The one in the Summa.
Yeah, I think they're connected, but yeah.
Yeah, so sorry, my daughter is knocking on the door right now. It distracted me. But Cajetan, he interprets this, and I want to get back to the text after this. But Cajetan, he interprets this as basically the unbelief is only said to be not simply speaking. That is like obviously not that you don't believe in God, but rather that no belief proceeds from this. So like it's not simply speaking, it's relatively speaking. It's like insofar as you attribute, X false statement to God, insofar as you're making this statement, you are not saying anything about God. Not that you just like don't
Yeah.
believe in God in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When are we collaborating on a response to Sean Luke? I don't think I want to do that.
What the heck is this guy talking about?
Oh, that's the catechumen. He's cool. This
Oh,
Sean
I
Luke
didn't see
guy.
who was speaking. I'm so sorry.
Uh,
Who is Sean Luke?
the Anglican aesthetics individual. He
Anglican aesthetics?
he has this video, and I want to get back to
What's that
the
like?
St. Augustine
What's that
text.
like? Pride flags and incense?
No, but if you believe it, no, I don't want to. I don't. Well, actually, you're Indian, so I can say it. He's Indian and he's
What's that supposed to mean?
aesthetics, which is really funny. But
Oh
I
my
promise I'll be
goodness.
getting back to what St. Augustine says here soon. But he has this video,
I'll
and
restrain myself.
the video, you'll never believe this. I need to see your unadulterated response to this. His video is that Vatican II made up the fact that baptism is fruitful when applied outside of the Roman communion.
Uh, well, I mean, he's an Indian Anglican. I can't expect him to know like Latin texts or manuals or like know who
Yeah,
the
but it's
Bollandists
like
are or anything. So
it's a really funny claim though, because like not even like the strictest Feeneites even believe this.
yeah, he's basically made it so that Roman Catholics before Vatican II were like Athonite exclusivists or something.
Yes, basically everyone before Vatican II. You know what's crazy is I just read the Alfonso de Castro that is against all heresies. He actually has a section. I just happened to be reading it the other day, and he goes over like a bajillion heresies on baptism. And when he's listing these bajillion heresies on baptism, he doesn't even list anybody as believing this view. Like this view is so fringe that Alfonso de Castro, who literally listed every heretic who ever existed, couldn't find a single individual who held on to this view. And apparently, according to this individual, This is the view of the entire Catholic Church before Vatican II. Like Alfonso de Castro lists Fenianism.
Okay.
He says that there's certain people who, like in the way past, denied baptism of desire or thought that outside of our communion baptism, was not valid. Like he lists people like this, but he like doesn't know of anybody who thinks that it's like valid, but it's not fruitful outside of the Roman communion.
To be honest, I kind of don't wanna attack the guy because I feel bad for him. He sounds like one of those guys who just, because he's a Protestant, there's no benchmark for knowing when you know enough to be able to start a YouTube channel, you know? So,
Yeah, but yeah, you did derail the stream, the catechumen. I'm sure this clip will unfortunately I'm sure this clip will end up getting like circled around places. But if it does, I hope they leave this part on it where I say for everyone to watch the rest of the video so you can read St.
wait.
We talk about important.
His name's Sean King and he's Indian?
Sean Luke.
His name's Sean Luke and he's Indian? Why is he called Sean?
I think
Why is
that's
he called
his real
Sean
name.
Luke?
I don't know. What do you think? It's like
That's
Vivek Ramaswamy or something, just because he's Indian?
no. But like, why does he have like an Anglo name? I know he's Anglican, but like,
I don't
know. Something seems
dude,
really.
I don't know.
Something seems. Something seems really wrong and off about that. I don't know.
Do the collab.
It's really weird.
I would do a different collab with the catechumen. It's like I told Mr. the catechumen in DMs. I'm like, look, I could literally do a 10-hour video and quote 500 theologians before Vatican II talking about how baptism can be fruitful outside of, or the sacraments can be fruitful outside of the Roman communion, going all the way back to the medieval or even the patristic church. Like you read Franzlin talking about St. Augustine on this point, Cardinal Franzlin, who was well before Vatican II. He was actually a Vatican I. So it's like this is such a like completely unhinged view. This is like as stupid as saying like the Roman Catholic Church didn't believe the Trinity until Vatican II. Like that's how unhinged this like statement is. There are a billion other more important things that I could talk about, including stuff like this, which I wanted to get back to about St. Augustine on concupiscence in the spiritual life. But anyways, is there anything else you wanted to add, Hassan, or should we continue?
No, that was the main thing I wanted to link together. The correspondence between the Romans 7 quote and Colossians 2.
Sean Luke's
and
Rome killed Hussites. Why would we kill people who are validly baptized or something like that? Nobody tell him about Erasmus's. Nobody tell him about Erasmus's heresy. Nobody tell him about it. Nobody.
Yeah, University of Paris. University of Paris condemnation that Trent was sourcing from. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can kill them actually. Not us. That would be wrong because we don't have the authority to do so. But
can we get back to the St. Augustine text?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Such soldiers, the apostolic trumpet enkindles for battle with the sound. Therefore, let not, says he, sin reign in your mortal body to obey its lusts, nor yield your members weapons of unrighteousness unto sin, but yield yourselves unto God, as living in place of dead, and your members weapons of righteousness unto God. For sin shall not rule over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. And in another place, therefore, says he, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live after the flesh. For if you shall live after the flesh, you shall die. But if by the Spirit you shall mortify the deeds of the flesh, you shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. Oh yeah, by the way, this is another important exegetical point from St. Augustine, is that he interprets the walking after the Spirit and the walking after the flesh as basically like in a state of grace versus in a state of mortal sin. If you're walking after the Spirit, even while you struggle with the motions of concupiscence, as Romans 7 talks about. In Romans 8, we hear that, well, if you're obeying the law of God in your mind and walking after the flesh, even while the concupiscence arises, you're able to reject that, and therefore you are still just. But for those who walk after the flesh, that is, those who are in a state of mortal sin, who are ordered towards their passions and the obedience thereof, these people, these are not in a state of grace. Let's continue. This, therefore, is the business in hand. So long as this our mortal life under grace lasts, that sin, that is, the lust of sin, for this he in this place calls by the name of sin, reigns not in this our mortal body. But it is then shown to reign if obedience be yielded to its desires. There is therefore in us lust of sin, which must not be suffered to reign. There are its desires, which we must not obey, lest obeying it reign over us. This is amazing exegesis of Romans 8. Wherefore, let not lust usurp our members, but let continence claim them for herself, that they be weapons of righteousness unto God, that they be not weapons of unrighteousness unto sin. For thus sin shall not rule over us, for we are not under the law, which indeed commands what is good, yet gives it not. But we are under grace, which, making us to love that which the law commands, is able to rule over the free. Okay, so notice the law, again, the law commands what is good, but does not give the means of carrying out the goodness. But when it comes to grace, grace commands, and commands actually the same thing that the law commands that love is the filling of the law, but is able to rule over the free insofar as it gives that which is able to fulfill the law. That is, it gives charity. Right? So this is like right here in a nutshell, just this paragraph right here is a biblical interpretation of the Catholic view of justification very easily. Okay, anything else to say, Assam?
I'm just thinking about it. It's very cool. I like that chapter.
Romans 7 and 8, I think, are the best chapters to use. But continuing, and also when he exhorts us that we live not after the flesh, lest we die, but that by the Spirit we mortify the deeds of the flesh, that we may live. Surely the trumpet which sounds shows the war in which we are engaged, and enkindles us to contend keenly, and to do our enemies to death, that we may not be done to death by them. But who are those? But who those enemies are, it has set forth plainly enough. For those are they whom it willed should be done to death by us, that is to say, the works of the flesh. For so it says, but if by the Spirit you shall mortify the deeds of the flesh, you shall live. And in order that we may know what these are, let us hear the same in like writing unto the Galatians, in saying, but the works of the flesh are manifest, which are fornications, uncleannesses, luxuries, idolatry, witchcrafts, hatreds, contentions, emulations, wraths, strifes, heresies, envyings, drunkennesses, revellings, and such like, of which I foretell to you, and I have foretold, that they who do such things shall not possess the kingdom of God. For the very war there also was he showing, that he should speak of these, and unto the death doing of these enemies was he calling up the soldiers of Christ by the same heavenly and spiritual trumpet. For he had said above, but I say, walk in the Spirit, and perform ye not the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are opposed one to the other, that you do not do what ye would. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Therefore, being set under grace, he would have them have that conflict against the works of the flesh. And in order to point out these works of the flesh, he added what I have mentioned above. But the works of the flesh are manifest, which are fornications, etc. And the rest, whether that what he mentioned or whether what he admonished were to be understood, chiefly as he added and such like. Lastly, in this battle, against what is in a manner the carnal army leading forth, as it were another spiritual line, but the fruits of the Spirit is, says he, charity, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faith, gentleness, continence. Against such there is no law. He says not against these, lest they should be thought to be alone, although, this exegesis is amazing. He says not against these, lest they should be thought to be alone, although even were he to say this, we ought to understand all, whatever goods of the same kind we could think of. But he says against such, that is to say, both these and whatsoever are such like. However, in that among the goods of which he had made mention, he sets continence in the last place, concerning which we have now undertaken to treat, and on account of which we have already said much. He willed that it should be in a special manner cleave to our minds. Wow, this is amazing. Do you see that, Hassan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the point is that when he's exegeting this, he says against such is in reference to continence, but this is slightly different than when we go up here and it says and such like. So basically, all of these sins and other things like it. But down here, he doesn't say that. He says against such. So against continence, there is no law. So here he's making a general statement in Galatians 5 when listing all of those works of the flesh. When he lists the fruits of the Spirit, he says that continence is basically that primary guardian of the spiritual life. And there's no law against continence. Yeah, it's amazing. Forsooth, the same is of great avail in this case, wherein the spirit lusts against the flesh, forasmuch as in a certain way it crucifies the lusts of the flesh. Whence, after the apostle had thus spoken, he added straightway, but they who are Jesus Christ's have crucified their own flesh with the passions and lusts. This is the acting of continence. Thus the works of the flesh are done to death. But they do to death those whom falling away from continence, lust draws into consent to do such works. Do you have anything to add, or should we continue?
I'm just thinking about this. This is very cool. The fruits of the spirit are one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, I love St. Augustine so much. Okay, beware of presumption. But in order that we fall not away from continence, we ought to watch specially against those snares of the suggestions of the devil, that we presume not on our own strength. For cursed is every one that sets his hope in man. And who is he but man? We cannot therefore truly say that he sets not his hope on man, who sets it in himself. For this also, to live after man, what is it but to live after the flesh? Whoever therefore is tempted by such a suggestion, let him hear, and if he have any Christian feeling, let him tremble. Let him hear, I say, if you shall live after the flesh, you shall die. Okay, this is really cool too. Because if we live in hopes of our own unaided natural strength, like the Pelagians did, we're actually setting our hope in men and then living after the flesh. But living after the Spirit is petitioning God for those various gifts which he gives to us, which produces those fruits of the Spirit. Yeah, I love to see it. You have anything to add, Hassan?
No, I'm still going back over bits of it. I'm really liking this though. What
But
are you
someone,
thinking
oh,
when you were saying, "Oh, this is such an awesome exegesis"? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking of the exegesis of Galatians 5. I hadn't really saw that point
Yeah,
of like the lack of complete unanimity between the fruits of the Spirit and then the works of the flesh.
yeah. St. Thomas elaborates on this point in his commentary
Mm,
quite a bit.
remember that.
If yeah, it'd be worth checking that out after this at some point.
Yeah, the Galatians real. The exegesis of Galatians 5 is freaking awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
Galatians is one of my favorite Pauline epistles because it's about the grace of Christ insofar as it's caused by the new covenant itself, right? So
Mm, mm.
yeah, super cool one.
Actually, this is a no. This is a really good point. Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking through the live chat. The fact that people with heretical baptisms have never had to confess their sins before they receive their baptisms.
What about it?
That would mean that the baptism is obviously fruitful.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so obviously it's not just like merely valid and like has no effect on the individual, which is like what he thinks.
Mhm.
Yeah, that Mr. Michael, that's a very good point. Anyways, let's continue. But someone will say to me that it is one thing to live after man, another thing to live after the flesh, because man forsooth is a rational creature, and there is in him a rational soul, whereby he differs from the beast. But the flesh is the lowest and earthly part of man, and thus to live after it is faulty. And for this reason, he who lives after man assuredly lives not after the flesh, but rather after that part of man whereby he is man, that is, after the spirit of the mind whereby he excels the beasts. But this discussion is perhaps of some force in the schools of philosophers. But we, in order to understand the apostle of Christ, ought to observe in what manner the Christian books are used to speak. Based. At any rate, yeah, get destroyed. Get absolutely owned, schools of philosophers. Destroyed. Just read your Bible. Just got to understand your Bible. At any rate, it is the belief of all of us to whom to live
That
in
goes
Christ.
back to Colossians 2 as well. Colossians 2 is like specifically against people who don't take doctrine into account when they do philosophy.
Exactly.
It's very explicit.
At any rate, it is the belief of all of us to whom to live is Christ, that man was taken unto himself by the word of God. Not surely without a rational soul, as certain heretics will have it. And yet we read, the word was made flesh. What is to be understood by flesh but man? And all flesh. Oh yeah, this is really awesome. So basically, he says, well, actually, by flesh you can understand by man. W. And all flesh shall see the salvation of God. What can be understood but all men? Unto you shall all flesh come. What is it but all men? You have given unto him power over all flesh. What is it but all men? Of the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. What is it but no man shall be justified? And this the same apostle, in another place, confessing more plainly says, man shall not be justified of the works of the law. The Corinthians also he rebuked, saying, are ye not carnal and walk after man? And after he had called them carnal, he says not, you walk after the flesh, but after man. Forasmuch as by this also, what would he have understood but after the flesh? For surely if to walk, that is, to live, after the flesh deserved blame, but after man deserved praise, he would not say by way of rebuke, ye walk after man. Let man recognize the reproach. Let him change his purpose. Let him shun destruction. Hear you, man, walk not after man, but after him who made man. Fall not away from him who made you, even unto yourself. For a man said, who yet lived not after man, not that we are sufficient to think anything from ourselves, as though of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. Consider if he lived after man, who spoke these things with truth. This is awesome. Therefore, the apostle, admonishing man not to live after man, restores man to God. But whoever lives not after man, but after God, assuredly lives not even after himself, because himself also is a man. But he is therefore said also to live after the flesh when he so lives, because also when the flesh alone has been named, man is understood. As we have already shown, just as when the soul alone has been named, man is understood. Whence it is said, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, that is, every man. And 75 souls went down into Egypt with Jacob, that is, 75 men. Okay, yeah, this is awesome. Therefore, live not after yourself, O man. You have thence perished, but you were salt. Live not.
Are there actually people who deny this? Are there actually people who deny this?
Deny what?
That flesh means the man in St. Paul.
No. But this is just awesome.
Oh,
Okay. Therefore, live not after yourself, O man. You had thence perished, but you were salt. Live not then, I say, after yourself, O man. You had thence perished, but you were found. Accuse not the nature of the flesh, when you hear it said, if you shall live after the flesh, you shall die. For thus could it be said, and most truly could it, if you shall live after yourselves, you shall die. For the devil has not flesh, and yet, because he would live after himself, he abode not in the truth. What wonder, therefore, if living after himself, when he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, which the truth spoke truly of him? Do you have anything to say about this one?
no.
No.
Well, why are you asking me? Is this something I should notice?
No, I just keep asking you after each section so I can give you due time to comment.
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. I want to see where he's going to take this. The next chapter seems to make it clear.
Okay, so this chapter, let no one trust in himself. When therefore you hear it said, sin shall reign over you, have not confidence of yourself.
Shall not reign over you.
Oh. When therefore you
Yeah.
hear it said, sin shall not reign over you, have not confidence of yourself, that sin reign not over you, but of him, unto whom a certain saint says in prayer, direct my paths after your word, and let no iniquity have dominion over me. For lest haply, after that we had heard, sin shall not reign over you, we should lift up ourselves and lay this to our own strength. Straightway the apostle saw this and added, for you are not under the law, but under grace. Yeah, the way this is crazily against the way in which your average contemporary Protestant will read this verse of you are not under the law, but under grace. Anyways, therefore grace causes that sin reign not over you. Boom. And remember what the reigning over is that we don't consent thereunto, that we are still ordered to God. This is amazing. Therefore grace causes that sin reign not over you. Do not therefore have confidence of yourself, lest it thence reign much more over you. And when we hear it said, if by the Spirit you shall mortify the deeds of the flesh, you shall live. Let us not lay this so great good unto our own spirit, as though of itself it can do this. For in order that we should not entertain that carnal sense, the spirit being dead rather than that which puts our others to death, straightway he added, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. Therefore, that by our spirit we may mortify the works of the flesh, we are led by the Spirit of God, who gives continence, whereby to curb, tame, and overcome lust. Anything to say or no?
No.
On the wounds of sin. In this so great conflict, wherein man under grace lives, and when being aided he fights well, rejoices in the Lord with trembling, there yet are not wanting even to valiant warriors, and mortifiers, however unconquered of the works of the flesh, some wounds of sin, for the healing of which they may say daily, forgive us our debts. Against the same vices, and against the devil, the prince and king of vices, striving with much greater watchfulness and keenness by the very prayer, that his deadly suggestions avail not anything, whereby he further urges the sinner to excuse rather than accuse his own sins, and thus those wounds not only be not healed, but also, although they were not deadly, yet may be pressed home to grievous and fatal harm. This is exactly what you were saying. Although they were not deadly, mortal, yet may be pressed home to grievous and further and fatal harm.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. And here, therefore,
Okay.
there's need of a more
Missed
cautious.
Sorry.
Do you have something to say important?
I was just saying, yeah, I don't remember who they were, but there were several people under that video who were substantially denying this doctrine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't even read the comments on those videos because I knew they were going to be
Okay.
stupid.
Well, these people basically are of this very strange mentality.
I
When
did read
the
initially, I read some
only
comments, but after that, I didn't.
the only thing that leads to like dispositions to mortal sin is venial sin. So nothing that is like so then there is nothing that is not sin at all that could not like venial sin in the proper sense of an immoral action, right? They would say there is nothing other than venial sin that can lead to mortal sin besides other mortal sins, right? Which
So stupid.
which is really stupid because you can very easily condition yourself through things that are not sins to commit mortal sins. Like then, like why do we fast at all? For example,
Yeah, well,
don't know.
that's what happens when you, if you, do you know how St. Pius X says, if you depart one word from the teaching of St. Thomas, especially in metaphysics, you are not in the least suspect of error? You remember when he says that?
Yeah,
Basically, I think the same with St. Augustine in spirituality. If you depart one word from the teaching of St. Augustine, you are not at least suspect of error.
mm,
I'm a little slow, so imperfections can lead both to venial and mortal sins. Not only imperfections, but even things that are not sins at all.
yeah. So, for example, so the point is, let's say something is materially sinful. Okay, so let's say somebody doesn't know that fornication is a sin, as an extreme example. Okay, someone doesn't know that fornication is a sin, and he fornicates. This will dispose his will and dispose his passions to lead him, because of the inclinations that it creates, to lead him to do acts that he knows are wrong. Okay, because it's intrinsically disordered and it's intrinsically damaging to the faculties. Or the same with lies. Somebody who tells lies and doesn't know that lying is wrong, he will end up doing other things that are wrong. Because it's actually damaging to your soul to do that. Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, he gets it. And here, therefore, there is need of a more cautious continence, whereby to restrain the proud appetite of man, whereby he is self-pleased, and unwilling to be found worthy of blame, and disdains when he sins to be convicted that he himself has sinned, not with healthful humility, taking upon him to accuse himself, but rather with fatal arrogance, seeking to find an excuse. In order to restrain this pride, he whose words I've already set down above, and as I could, commended, saw continence from the Lord. For after that he had said, Set, O Lord, a watch to my mouth, and a door of continence around my lips. Make not my heart to fall aside unto evil words. Explaining more clearly whereof he spoke this, he said, to make excuses and sins. For what more evil than these words, whereby the evil man denies that he is evil, although convicted of an evil work, which he cannot deny? And since he cannot hide the deed, or say that it is well done, and still sees that it is clear that it was done by him, he seeks to refer to another.
The way he's writing it, bro.
What? What do you mean?
I don't know, it's kind of funny. It's like, it's like, look at this guy. He can't hide it. He can't say that he did something good, but obviously he did it. So now what?
He seeks to refer to another what he has done, as though he
Yeah.
removed thence what he has deserved. He can't hide it, can't say it's well done, so he just blames somebody else. This guy sucks.
It's his fault.
Yeah, he was I was gonna say he was real for that, but he wasn't. Being unwilling that himself be guilty, he rather adds to his guilt, and by excusing, not accusing his own sins, he knows not that he is putting from him not punishment, but pardon. I like that statement. He knows not that he is putting from himself not punishment, but pardon. For before human
Yeah,
judge,
it
oh,
goes
sorry.
back to the earlier point. It goes back to the early point from Romans 7 and Colossians 2 that like uh and St. Augustine's comment on the pedagogical value of the law. If you choose not to have like a if somebody chooses not to receive a proper moral education because they would rather be more ignorant, they're not going to like stay away from punishment because they're going to know less things that are wrong. They're going to be in more danger through that ignorance because they're going to dispose themselves to mortal sin.
Mm.
I've met a bunch of people who think moral education is they won't say this explicitly, but it's very clear that their perspective is that moral education is dangerous. It's better to just be more ignorant so that you can get away with more things because you don't know they're wrong.
So stupid.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, it is true because, like, for example, I guess because somebody brought up food, but I don't think food is a good example. I think there's actually a good example when it comes to like our traditional, and St. Augustine talks about this later in the same work, which we'll get to. Our traditional ascetical view of marriage is like there's a lot of people who don't know about the traditional teaching about in accordance with the teaching of Blessed Innocent the 11th and all of the theologians, all of everyone. Um, it is venially sinful to engage in the marital use for pleasure alone. So there's a lot of people out there who, ignorant of this moral teaching, just kind of are very uh,
Okay.
uh,
But
incontinent.
for for pleasure alone, provided that, as St. Thomas says, the spouse is taken
No,
as a
no, 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 no.
singularly desirable
Oh
object
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
affection.
Within the bounds
Because
of
if yeah,
yeah.
if you were to approach your spouse like
No, no.
just
This
as
is
the
going to be
only person you can get
my
away
point,
with,
son.
yeah,
It's going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
my point. So
yeah,
the habitual use of the marital use for pleasure alone, often there's going to be a
hmm
number of different effects, including the so complete objectification of the other person that you are simply approaching that individual um,
as a
as
harlot,
St. Thomas teaches. Yes, as Saint Jerome
yeah,
says, he who loves his wife too ardently makes her a harlot. Basically, what's
yeah.
occurring is you are so ardently, engaging in this for simply the sake of the gratification of lust that you have actually turned the marital bed into a bed of defilement. And you are actually mortally sinning. This happens probably more frequently than we would like to think. Um, you are turning this into a case of mortal sin. Or on the other hand, you may have the individual who is so engrossed and so enraptured in this lust, in the feeding of concupiscence, that they're going to sin sexually in other ways as well. And all of
This,
these effects come
yeah.
about from somebody who doesn't know the moral teaching. That's the
let's
important
say
part.
hypothetically someone doesn't know and they engage in this act of doing it for pleasure alone with the woman as the singularly desirable object. They don't necessarily even know the distinction between the venial and mortal forms of the marital acts for pleasure alone, right? So if they're this ignorant, so they go and do the act for, basically treating their wife as a singularly desirable object or like source of pleasure, right?
Mm.
And then as they do this, it ends up shifting gradually into just basically the fact that she is attractive and she's available to you without
Yeah.
repercussions, without temporal repercussions. He may not even realize that it's shifted. He may not even realize that his attitude towards her is shifted because it might be gradual, right? Um, and then the thing is that as he moves in this direction, he will end up committing mortal sins, even if they're not mortal sins of lust, because the thing is that lust leads to other sins, as Luis de la Palma says in the Fathers say, like if you're committing lust frequently, you will end up committing greed, and you will end up mistreating your friends, etc.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you'll and then because of that, you'll fall into wrath because sins of wrath are effectively they're effectively an inordinate desire for vindication when you feel that your goods have been damaged, right? And that comes from greed as well. So basically, sometimes people don't understand that the different vices are connected, and that developing worse and worse material sins in one area might lead to mortal sins in one of these other downstream areas, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think Michael
Yeah.
had a typo because what he said doesn't make sense.
What did he say?
He said, "Are there scenarios where it would be sinful for one spouse to request the debt, but sinful for the other to refuse?" I don't know what he means by this.
So in the medieval era, there was actually a dispute over this. There were some people who believed that sometimes you could be like obliged to facilitate your spouse committing a sin, right? So, so like for example, let's say that you know 100% for sure that your spouse is requesting the debt on a false pretext, right? They're not really requesting it for the sake of the illicit use of the act. They're really requesting the debt to like use you for
Yeah.
pleasure, right? Some medievals believe that because of the right over one another's bodies, you would have to give it up. It would be basically their problem. It's their problem. They're
Yeah.
misusing you, but you have to submit anyway. St. Thomas doesn't take this view. I'm very sure of that. Though some people accuse him of it, I'm very sure that he doesn't take this view. And there are other people who explicitly reject this view as well. Like you sent me a paper from St. Benedine of Siena. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, about him. I really dislike a lot of parts of that paper, but it did bring out very clearly that he opposed this position. But there were people who took this position, but it's wrong. It's like clearly wrong. How can it be an act of fidelity to help your spouse to go to hell? Doesn't make sense.
True. Okay. Yeah, I get what you're saying now. Um, we're almost 2 hours in. It's 8 o'clock right now. Did you want to like just do a part two, or yeah, just do a part two? So we got here.
Yeah, why not?
This is like
Why
a
not?
natural um talk. Actually, I need
What's
to
the
read this paragraph. For before the human judges, for as much as they may be deceived, it seems to profit somewhat for the time to cleanse, as it were, what had been done amiss by any deceit whatever. But before God, who cannot be deceived, we are to use not a deceitful defense, but a true confession of sins.
Let's go. Yeah, you can't lie to God.
It's very true.
So
Um,
lying to your own conscience is lying to the proximate law by which you are judged by God. So it is lying to God.
what's the difference between requesting
Persepians.
debt
Yeah,
to
important
avoid
question.
mortally sinning and just requesting it to use her?
Yeah.
I mean the first one. It well, I mean the first one. I don't think that's like an adequate distinction because you can
Okay. So
request to avoid mortally sin and still
yeah,
request it in terms
the
of use the other person.
the problem is that he may be under the false assumption that the legitimate request of the debt is, oh, let's enjoy pleasure the licit way so that I can avoid like committing masturbation or adultery. Right? That's not. In case that's what you thought, that is absolutely not what it means. Like the the idea isn't that like my sexual urges are like a pressure valve and I need to let off some steam. Okay, good thing I'm married. That's not how it works. That's actually kind of disgusting, and no one should treat their wife like that. Uh, and no one should treat their husband like that. That's actually vile, and I hope nobody here actually treats their spouse like this because it's dehumanizing. So should just don't do that. Uh, and also you're dehumanizing yourself. Like you're not an animal. Wake up a little bit. When you request the debt from your spouse, it's because there is a certain moral need to turn away from masturbatory impulses. Now, a masturbatory impulse is basically the desire to use sex for the sake of pleasure itself. So it doesn't make sense if you request the debt from your spouse in order to avoid masturbatory impulses. And the requesting of the debt is nothing but the requesting of the use of the woman's body effectively to commit an act of masturbation. That makes no sense at all. So therefore, the marital debt is effectively, this can be explained from St. Thomas, but I won't go into it because you need to cut together lots of different places in his writing on this, on the marital debt. But basically, the requesting of the marital debt is for the sake of turning the sexual faculty back to its intended function of being directed to the good of the other. So the purpose of requesting the marital debt is that you perceive within yourself this inclination to the use of the sexual faculty for your own sake, and you drive it, or rather for basically the sake of your concupiscible appetites, and for your own spiritual sake, you turn the faculty back to and basically the act of benevolence towards your spouse. So the act should be an act of benevolence. It should not be an act of like serving your own flesh ever, never ever.
Yeah, there's actually
That's
something good
yeah.
from St. John Paul II on this, which is kind of ironic. If you know the people who usually quote St. John Paul II.
If you are really tempted to masturbation, you can request it, but it's a venial sin. Yeah, that's the point that Christian was making a few minutes ago. If you request, if it's not a legitimate request of the marital debt. It's because the thing is the use of the marital debt is the use of a right. Okay. Now, any so-called use of a right, which is a sin, is not the use of the right at all, but an abuse of the right. So when you abuse your wife's body for the sake of pleasure, that's not use of the marital right, and therefore you're not actually being rendered a debt, because you are not owed an ability to commit a venial sin. You're never owed the ability to commit a venial sin. So all you're doing is abusing this right. And an abuse is not a bad use. It's not a use at all. It's a misuse.
Yeah, like this. These are from Theology of the Body. The best one is going to be right here, interpreting the concept of concupiscence. St. John Paul II, he's extremely, extremely clear about this, about the evils of concupiscence in lusting after one's own spouse. I mean, things like depersonalizing effects of concupiscence, establishing the ethical sense, mutual attraction differs from lust, etc. I mean, these are going to be very important sections from Theology of the Body on this, which are in line with the tradition.
John Paul II, the Augustinian.
So true, St. John Paul II, the Augustinian. Yeah, I can't imagine the just idea, even the idea that St. John Paul II would disagree with the tradition and with Blessed Innocent the 11th on this point. Because it's extremely clear that with the condemned theses of some of the laxists that Blessed Innocent the 11th condemns, it seems very clear that John Paul II thinks the exact same way. And he goes even further, actually, in condemning even, looks and such that are motivated by concupiscence as an end. And even those, which is like one could bring about the broader application that not only the marital use itself, but also all of those secondary acts, so looks, touches, kisses, etc., all the secondary acts are not supposed to be done purely to derive venereal pleasure, but also only as they are subordinated to the proper ends of the marital use.
Which of course means like uh, you're aiming that. Just to be clear, when we say that there's benevolence, the aim is to bring about pleasure in the other person's body as an expression of benevolence, so that they know that they are loved. Like that it is legitimate to bring about pleasure in the other person's body. This is one of the this is one of the ways in which the act is benevolent. The point is that you're not doing it to satisfy some concupiscible appetite in yourself. You're doing it as an act of benevolence. You're using the body as a certain instrument for expressing love towards a person, and that's how John Paul II unravels some confusions here by way of resorting to the personalist language.
Mm. What website is that? That's on the EWTN website. I don't know if it is annoying for you guys to go over this stuff regarding marriage so often, but it is very appreciated. I appreciate it. It's not the most comfortable for me because obviously Hassan and I, anytime we bring up the traditional teaching, it just you end up getting a flood of hate mail, and people say pretty nasty things about you. Maybe I'll just
Yeah.
because people are asking other questions.
The thing is that especially Christian and I, for our own background reasons, are extremely committed to rooting out these errors, because these are some of the characteristic errors that are universal within Islam, for example, right?
Yeah.
In every single Islamic school of thought, it's completely legitimate to do the marital acts for pleasure alone. In fact, their disgusting and distorted idea of the marital debt is not a moral necessity. It is actually just a right to pleasure. That's actually what they think the marital debt is. And this is extremely disturbing. And so seeing Christians, or worse, seeing Catholics have attitudes like this, or trying to put it forward as a theological opinion, is extremely disturbing. And in practice, it's something that needs to come to an end. Every single Catholic needs to be aware that this position is condemned. Every single one. So that people can actually have an informed conscience about the fact that this is a problem to get over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And since these questions are being asked, I did recently. I think I'm going to share the article. Somebody asked me recently about the lawfulness of, because a lot of your questions about like NFP and everything like that are asking in the comments. Somebody asked me recently about pregnancy, and I've been reading some of the earlier moralists writing about relations during pregnancy. So I gave like a brief overview of the teaching on this matter amongst the fathers and the theologians. But yeah, I put in the live chat. How is chewing gum not immoral under natural law?
That's actually a good question. Do you remember we
Dude,
talked to Ethan about that once on
read
WhatsApp?
on just read on.
I hate
Well,
it
I mean,
too.
because I think when it comes to arguing about sodomy, like the worst argument you can make, to be honest, is the perverted
Yeah,
faculty.
but
Or a much better argument to make is
it's
about concupiscence. But people just don't want to
yeah.
bite the bullet on that because then they have to be Augustinians, which they're not.
But the thing is that the concupiscence. Okay. So the thing about the chewing gum thing is it's still useful to fix this, because usually people who ask this question don't really understand what we even mean by like the end of some faculty, right? Also,
Yeah.
there's a confusion. Also, there's a confusion about like something peculiar to the nutritive faculty, which is that the sense of taste, the sense of taste is a sensory faculty, and the sense of and satiation is not a sensory faculty; it's a digestive faculty. They're two distinct things. One of them is something that you see with, so to speak, and the other is something that you actually receive nutrition into your body with. So as soon as you make that distinction, the chewing gum thing becomes a lot clearer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not abusing the ability to digest by refreshing your breath or chewing something that tastes nice or by like using it as a focus aid. Like none of those things are contrary to like the function of the taste, the sense of taste in punk.
So true, but I still hate this question.
Yeah.
I really don't like it. Yeah, I've been meaning to.
Someone.
Soon I'm going to
Sorry.
read Sanchez. Read through a lot of what Sanchez says in De Matrimonia, even though he does have occasionally a weird position, but he's kind of just the standard guy.
He had a couple of really strange opinions. You know, one of his opinions was like soft condemned. Do you remember this? And then he changed his view later anyway, so it was okay. Fever talks about it in his commentary on the condemned Proposition 40 from Alexander.
Really?
Yeah, I'll send you it later. So
Okay.
there's a question here about NFP is probably useful to solve. No, you don't need to immediately intend procreation with every act. That's why there are three. That's why there are three legitimate intentions in the
Two.
marital act. What did he mean by this?
I like the classic two formulation better.
It's the same thing though. Like
I know.
one is to do with the debt and the other to do with procreation, but the debt can be subdivided into requesting and rendering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it is. I think it is useful to say that it's most honorable to intend procreation. It's less honorable. It's less honorable to render the debt, and it's the least honorable, but still legitimate to request the debt.
Yeah, I should be too Puritan about things like humor. Yeah, I prefer to.
Oh,
I prefer to be too Puritan about all the stuff that makes people mad at me. Those are the things I'll be. Which is funny because when you read Puritan authors, they're always when they're talking about this
they're
topic,
kind
they're
of
always
vile.
talking about how
Yeah.
strict Catholic authors are.
The thing about I don't know where that reputation comes from. The Puritans were kind of degenerate. But also the thing is that like the thing people claim as being like puritanical nowadays, that was what Catholic authors used to say, and no one else said those things but Catholic authors. No one, not Muslims, not EOs, not Protestants, nobody, only us. So it's kind of weird. Uh, of course, some of it's over the top, but yeah, but it's just a strange thing to say. The stuff on humor is difficult though because nowadays, like we are like objectively moving in a direction where our speech is becoming full of venereal like idioms that have venereal significations, which is really gross. You sent me a screenshot of one earlier.
Yeah, it
It's
was
just
pretty bad.
disgusting. It's just disgusting. Like the way young people speak is like almost all of the new phrases have a venereal meaning.
Did you say young people? The way in which young people speak? You're getting old,
Yeah,
Hassan. Boomer.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I agree.
young people, the way young people speak is objectively getting worse. And the way that people joke around seems like almost irreparably damaged by internet irony culture as well. Like the number of people who are otherwise like normal Catholics who make it a habit of speech to joke about like raping people, for example, online. I just don't understand. I don't understand. Like, at what point do you realize that it's not becoming of somebody who wants to call himself like a son of Christ to talk like that?
This is true. Trying to think about how to clearly explain to leftists that contraception is a misuse of sexuality in a way that condemns sodomy, but doesn't apply to infertile couples. Any help?
What does that mean?
Yeah, I'm kind of confused what it means too. I was hoping you'd understand. That condemns Why are you explaining
So
contraception to
okay,
condemn sodomy?
I know Mimo. I kind of just need to read it twice to get it. Okay, trying to think about how to clearly explain to leftists contraception's a misuse of sexuality in a way that condemns sodomy but doesn't apply to infertile couples. Well, that's pretty simple. Okay, so basically, there are two ways to sin by contraception. Okay, one of them attacks the integrity of the sexual act, and the other one attacks the physical integrity of the body. Both of them attack the physical integrity of something. Now, um, when two people are already infertile, right? Two people are infertile. There is some defect of nature, right? Defect of nature, which is preventing them from being able to like reasonably intend procreation because they know it's unlikely to happen or like certainly not going to happen without a miracle, right? So when they do the act, they're only doing the act for the rendering of the debt. They're only doing the act for the rendering of the debt, for no other reason than the rendering of the debt, unless they're sinning. Uh, but with sodomy, there's no defect of nature. There is an incompatibility of the two of nature because it's not intended by nature for men to place themselves into the digestive tract of other men. Okay, like that's not like what is occurring in the marital act done by two people who are infertile. One of them is infertile. They're doing the natural marital act. There's just some defect of body preventing it from its fruitfulness. That again, like if you were to do the same thing with a woman, it would also be wrong, right? You can't place yourself into someone's digestive tract. It's not supposed to go there. It's not supposed to go there. Okay, Mima, does that help? These are all different things. Like contraceptive sexuality is different to sodomy. Sodomy is wrong whether it's with somebody of the same sex or somebody of the opposite sex, even if it's your wife. And so also like contraceptivism when you attack the integrity of the act by preventing it from its fruitfulness through a prophylactic, but when you attack the fruitfulness of the reproductive power of the body itself by taking pills or getting a vasectomy or something, those are sins. Those are also sins, right? Because you're attacking the fruitfulness of the body or the fruitfulness of the act, which there is no such attack when two people happen to be infertile.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to make the argument from concupiscence? So now that I've tried to do the argument from it doesn't go there.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's I guess the best way to make this argument is to simply consider the case of food. That's usually where I will begin with this. And this helps us understand a lot of where the limitations are with secondary venereal acts as well, because there is there's like a certain, I guess, confusion that somebody could have if they're learning about the teaching on concupiscence and sense pleasure and such. They think about the question of whether I should salt my food. Let's pretend for a second that salting your food didn't give you any sort of essential nutrients, which it does. Like putting MSG on your food, I guess might be a better question. Like, is it immoral to do this? And the answer is no, because when it comes to the good taste of food, the good taste of food is naturally concomitant with the act of eating. Why? Because eating is necessary for the life of the body. So, if you have to go out there and risk your life to go and get food, you have to go out there and do all of these things to go and get food. If there wasn't this strong positive impetus of, oh, this tastes good, in a lot of cases, people wouldn't be able to properly sustain their body. So God has, in a way, certainly given some sort of enjoyment in the act of eating in order to achieve its end in a greater way. And this is part of the wisdom and prudence of God. In a similar way, there has, when it comes to the act of reproduction, there's been a certain pleasure attached to this. And, you can ask yourself the question, if there wasn't such a vehement pleasure attached to the act, how many people would actually be having kids? It would obviously be some, because some are honorable and they recognize the intrinsic and inherent goodness of having children, especially children which are raised for the honor and glory of the Blessed Trinity. But a lot of people, if there weren't this concomitant pleasure, they wouldn't be as attached to this. And this is what makes actually contraception so incredibly evil. This is what makes onanism so incredibly evil. This is what makes sodomy so incredibly evil. This is what makes all of these deliberate acts which frustrate the end of procreation, is because basically you are taking a certain wise ordinance of God in order to carry out the production of and the preservation of our species, and you've taken that as some sort of matter of personal entertainment in the consent to lust. So in this case, rather than the proper enjoyment of acts which lead to their proper end, you are simply making the enjoyment of those acts ends in themselves. So a prudent, wise, and discerning person can take these considerations and ask themselves, when it comes to the primary venereal act and the secondary venereal acts, how in many cases they can very easily be turned into quasi-sodomitical acts, which bring about what the moralists call sodomitic affection, in making the pleasure acquired and the pleasure in these various acts the end, rather than procreation, with certain enjoyment following. Does that make sense?
Also, yeah, one point I would make is that the incentivization of reproduction through pleasure is not necessarily that man seeks his own pleasure, but also that since man loves his wife, from benevolence, he may desire to express his love towards his wife by bringing about pleasure within her. And if that's the case, then the giving of pleasure, the mutual giving of pleasure for the sake of expressing the love of benevolence towards the other, would be not directed towards one's own pleasure, but it would incentivize reproduction through this provision of something to will towards the other, which is good, some benevolence to will towards the other. Whereas if we were merely to say that reproduction was incentivized because man is able to derive pleasure for himself, then we would be saying that reproduction is incentivized by sin, right? So yeah, so it's important to make that that caveat that, like, someone But this is where it gets complicated, because due to the fall, the loss of reason that occurs means that you shouldn't just willy nilly do the act for the sake of benevolence towards your spouse. Somebody asked this recently. I thought it was a very good question. He said, if it's the case that the purpose of the marital act is for benevolence, then why couldn't you do the act merely for benevolence? Why isn't it permissible to do the act merely for benevolence, even when there is no like moral need, right? Even when there's no moral need, couldn't you simply do the act in order to like to will pleasure in the other person? And I think the answer would be, if we're in the state of pure nature, that would be fine, but we're not. The act has a certain venial debt associated with it due to the fact that there is a loss of reason. And it is actually not good for a human being to place himself in such a state where his will loses the ability to consent to a pleasure. That's not good for you. And so that's why it shouldn't be done unless there is a justifying cause, St. Thomas says.
Yeah. Well, it is 8:30, and I need to go. Hassan needs to go to bed.
Yep.
But yeah, we will continue the rest of this next time. Continuing on what section 514. From whom sin depends. I don't know when we're going to get to this, but it should be during Lent sometime, because I'm trying to keep the topics more ascetical in nature rather than controversial. Or although I am doing a controversial stream tomorrow night, but that's just for a special occasion. But yeah, that's all that I have. Thank you,
Wait,
Hassan.
what's tomorrow night?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't want to keep talking about this, Hassan.
Okay, you can tell me afterwards.
Oh no, the Michael guy just asked a question.
Well, some people defend the idea that it's illicit for a man to, since it's not essential to begetting. St. Alfonso says it said. I would make a distinction. If it's done merely for the act of pleasure, it's wrong. But there are some women where it is like where manual stimulation can be necessary. Why are you looking like that, bro? There are some situations where manual stimulation can be necessary for the sake of the women not to experience discomfort or pain, which would make the rendering of the marital debt difficult. Because how do you make an act of benevolence when it just like feels like crap for the other person? You're not really like willing much good to the other person. So yeah, you know, that's the kind of thing that you shouldn't really ask on a YouTube video. By the way, you should ask that like privately. But since it's there, it may as well get explained.
Mm. Yeah, and I think actually this the quotation that's often I think the position that's I guess often appealed to from Saint Alphonsus. I think this is fake. I think Ron Conte actually made this up.
Yeah, he did make it up.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, like
That guy's
all
nuts.
traditional.
That guy is actually nuts. By the way, he's
Yeah,
crazy. He's
it's okay. So all I'm going to say about this, because I don't know. Basically, there are primary venereal acts and there are secondary venereal acts. Primary venereal act includes intercourse. Secondary venereal acts includes those acts which are preparatory for the primary venereal act. So this is going to be things like touches, looks, kisses, etc. These are not, in any case, whether within or outside of the marital act, to be sought solely for the sake of pleasure as its own end. But rather, while pleasure is consequent upon these and can be properly enjoyed, these are sought as manners of preparation for the primary venereal act. So unless these acts by some other circumstance, such as them being sodomitical, which is why those other acts are not fine, or by any other circumstance, they're fine. So, yeah, I literally think that Ron Conte just made this up, that St. Alphonsus taught this. I've never, ever, ever seen St. Alphonsus say this. And in fact, when he talks about secondary venereal acts, he says the exact opposite of what Ron Conte says. But anyways, I really did not want to answer that question. But I hope that you all have a fantastic day. I'm going to, I don't know, I'm going to play COD or something after this end of the stream. But thank you, Hassan. As always, God bless.
Pope Benedict XVI said that mental prayer is an ordinary means that enables the disciple of Jesus to live in intimacy with the divine teacher. Yet, how does one engage in mental prayer? One of the greatest masters of the spiritual life was Saint Ignatius of Loyola. In the 19th century, a certain Jesuit priest decided to write a complete guide to mental prayer, patterned on the works of Saint Ignatius. Check out this work on Amazon, completely typeset under the title A Brief Guide to Mental Prayer According to the Mind of Saint Ignatius.